the date well because it was my 18th birthday. So it's a big day and a big vote coming up tomorrow. At the moment, it's too close to call. Will people support Boris's Great New Deal or will they oppose it? The betting markets say it's anyone's guess. I have to say that I don't think this is great at all. It's better, no question about that. It is better than Mrs May's abject surrender because it's got very clear commitments that we will, at least most of the United Kingdom, not Northern Ireland, but most of the United Kingdom, will be absolutely out of the EU's customs union. In Northern Ireland, it's more complicated, and there'll be 2 jurisdictions there. So that's the good bit. That's the bit he's improved. The problem is, it's just simply not enough. And to me, it just isn't Brexit for reasons that I'll explain. New. Oh, come on, Boris. 95% of the withdrawal agreement is exactly the same as Mrs May's withdrawal agreement, the one change being on the backstop and customs union arrangements. And all you're doing by calling it new, you are putting lipstick on a pig. It's 95% the same. And the constant use of this word deal, as if there's been some wonderful trade done. It's not a deal. It is a new EU treaty, okay? And it is binding in international law. It commits us to many things, including, unbelievably, that our foreign policy in the future should not deviate from that of the European Union, which I find totally and utterly remarkable, given, of course, that the last time the House of Commons sat, it was because we were pursuing our own independent foreign policy, namely going to war in the Falkland Islands. And there is attached to this a political declaration which sets out the future. Now, if you think this passing in the course of the next few weeks gets Brexit done, you're in for a hell of a shock. I would say we've done the easy bit. The hard bit will be negotiating a new trade agreement, and Monsieur Barnier has already laid out that in any new trade agreement, we absolutely have to have regulatory alignment on environmental law, on social protection, on employment legislation, on state aid rules, and even on tax. So if we were, for argument's sake, to cut corporation tax if we'd left the European Union, he would say you can't have a trade deal because that is unfair competition. So you finish up with vast swathes of your national life over which, actually, it's not the rules you make in your own country that count, because you have to align to those that are being made in the European Union. It costs us 39 billion. Well, that's 39 billion if we leave at the end of the transition period, at the end of 2020. But they've already made provisions for us to stay in until 2022. And everywhere I look, policy area after policy area, I just look at this and think, well, what Boris wants is a short-term hit to say to the public, we have left. And then hoping for him, I guess, he really believed that a quick general election, he wins it, because he's got Brexit done, and by the time the public find out we haven't actually got Brexit done, it'll all be too late. So I would like our MPs to vote against this tomorrow. Why? Because I think we need a general election. I think the real problem here is we have a rampant Remainer Parliament and a Leave country, and somehow we need to try to close that gap. I'm all for a trade deal, a genuine free trade deal, but not one that has to have political alignment which is judged by the European Union, not by some independent arbitrator. And amazingly, if we ever did get to that trade deal, guess who would be in charge of any dispute mechanism? The European Court of Justice. So you can see ministers popping up on your screen telling you this takes back control of our laws, our money, and our borders, and it is absolutely not true. None of it's guaranteed, and most of it, if we did sign a new trade deal, would be quite the opposite to what people are being told. MPs are being corralled, being told all sorts of things. The ERG are being told, if you don't vote for this, there'll be no Brexit at all. They're being told, well, don't worry, because if we can't agree a trade deal, we'll just leave with no deal. I mean, we've heard that one before. So all the great parliamentary tricks are being used. And I would say to those MPs, particularly the ERG, remember what happened at Maastricht. All right, I get it, it's 26 years ago, but the principles are very similar. Lots of people who'd opposed the big new European treaty in the end voted for it because they were told if you don't vote for this, Labour might get in. And what they did is they put party before country. And I would urge ERGers not to make that same historic mistake tomorrow. If it does pass, well, then I promise you we are headed in to several more years of acrimony and difficulty. This, I'm happy to compromise. If I thought this really was Brexit, how would I oppose it? After 25 years plus of campaigning for this, nobody has put more energy, effort and emotion into getting Brexit than I have. But this, to me, is not Brexit. What do you think? What do you want your MP to do? Do you buy the Boris line? That if we don't do this, we may never get Brexit. If you do, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe like me, you think this is simply not Brexit, you'd rather have a clean break, text to 84850 and tell me, will this agony ever end, or is it going to roll on for years? Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course, on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter, you can watch us and you can comment. Ashley from Sales says, my MP is Graham Brady, and I want him to vote for this fantastic deal. It's not a deal, Ashley. It's a new EU treaty. Let's stop calling it a deal. It's not a deal. Boris has managed to get 5% of it amended. An important 5%, I grant you, but still, the rest of it stands. What does Steve from Tunbridge make of it? Good evening, Steve.
Hi there, Nigel. My understanding, or correct me if I'm wrong, Boris Johnson is going to go to the nation and say, I've managed to get Brexit through. Uh-huh. But then, after 4 years, we're going to have another European election where we send British MEPs to the European Union. Is that right?
No, because if we do leave, if we're seen to have left the European Union on November the 1st, and albeit I'm making the argument, Steve, that it's Brexit in name only, but what will happen is our MEPs will all go, and we'll go through this transition period with laws being made for us, and we will have no voice and no vote whatsoever.
Oh, so it's even worse than I thought.
Well, in some ways, Steve, some think this new treaty is even worse. Even Eurosceptics think it's even worse than current EU membership.
Well, Nigel, then I think the only thing that can be done is to prepare, because it's quite clear what's going to happen next. I think what's going to happen is that they're going to try and vote this thing through, and if not this, they're going to try and push through a second referendum, and then they're going to try and split the leave vote by introducing this weird thing of soft and hard Brexit, which was not in the first referendum, which I think should be highlighted each and every time, that there's no such thing as soft and hard Brexit.
No, they invented this after the results, Steve. Of course they did. I mean, Steve, as a Brexiteer, a lot of fellow Brexiteers are feeling fatigued by all of this, and I think what Boris is banking on is, oh, thank goodness, here's a fix, it's all over, his slogan to get Brexit done. You can see why, until people know the detail, they might find this idea attractive.
Yeah, absolutely, but it is frustrating. I can see why people Brexiteers are losing their will to live, essentially, with this. Because it's really... I mean, I thought we won in 2016, but...
Steve, so did I. So did I. Steve,
really
thank you for your call. Adrian in Manchester says, so Boris's deal means you can't actually polish it's the T word, I won't use it. John from Wales says, this treaty is not Brexit. It must be voted down, and 17.41 million voters listen to. It surrenders our country. I never voted to surrender. So some very, very strong views there from John. More of your calls in a moment, but for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, special edition on a Friday. The time is now 6:15. News headlines with Lisa Aziz.
tomorrow, which changes everything. Provided, of course, Nigel, that it is first accepted by John Bercow tomorrow, chosen, and second, that it is passed. But if it is passed, it changes everything. It deprives us of that moment of clarity, if you like, that straight vote on Boris Johnson's deal. Let me read it out to you, or at least a shortened version. It says, in the light of the new deal agreed with the EU, this House has considered the matter, but withholds approval unless and until implementing legislation is passed. Now, let's unpack that slightly. Your listeners will have no doubt remember that two things need to happen to pass this deal. First of all, MPs need to pass it in a vote in the House of Commons. That was what was initially supposed to be happening tomorrow. But then they also need to pass legislation to make it law, the so-called Withdrawal Agreement Bill, or WAB as it's known here in Westminster for short. And only then can we leave with a deal. So what this Letwin Amendment does is it withholds approval of the deal until the legislation is passed, until the second part, if you like, happens. And what does that mean, Nigel? Well, it means that the terms of the Benn Act still stand, which means Boris Johnson still has to ask for an extension to Article 50. And now all of this has been done, so far as I can tell, because we have to imagine that trust is at an all-time low in Parliament at the moment, Nigel, and there are fears that even if MPs do stage one tomorrow, they pass the deal, then something could go wrong in stage two at the legislation stage, and we could crash out on October the 31st, or leave on October the 31st.
When you say crash out, Matthew, do you mean,
I corrected myself,
do you mean
Nigel,
leave with a clean break?
Pick me up on that. I thought you might pick me up on that. We might leave on October the 31st without the legislation in place. Now, that's something that we know Oliver Letwin and lots of the independent Conservatives, if you like, don't want to see. So what they've tried to do is put this amendment in, which will, if you like, delay the moment of truth. It allows people to swing behind at least getting us to the next stage of implementing the withdrawal agreement bill, but without actually definitively approving the deal. So there's a suggestion that the Labour Party might back it, because that forces the extension to Article 50. And also it means that I spent the day, Nigel, with an abacus totting up the numbers of people that I think might vote for Boris Johnson's deal. But what it means is that any MP who's wavering tonight, any Labour MP or even Conservative MP who's not sure what they want to vote for, they can vote for the Letwin Amendment and then vote for the amended motion, knowing that this just buys them more time. And if they don't like the deal that's on the table, well, then they can use the legislation to try and change it. So
if this amendment was selected by the Speaker tomorrow, and David on Facebook says Bercow absolutely would accept the amendment because he's a Remainer. But if it is accepted and voted on and it passes, do we still get that vote at 5 or 6 o'clock tomorrow night?
So you would have a vote,
as an indicative vote.
You would have a vote that would be as amended. So you would vote on the motion with the Letwin Amendment.
Yes.
But all it would do would trigger stage two. So if you like, those stage one of the process is the vote. Stage two is implementing the withdrawal agreement bill. So it would then bring us to the legislation stage, and we would have then several weeks of trying to put that legislation through. But it would also mean Boris Johnson has to request an extension from the EU. Now, it's not certain that they would even grant that, Nigel, and you could end up in a standoff where the EU say, well, look, we're not granting you the extension until you at least in principle show us that you've got the support for the deal. So we need to see a straight indicative vote. But Parliament is saying, well, look, we're not going to do that until we're sure we get the extension.
Yeah. And of course, tomorrow is the day, isn't it? The 19th of October is the day the Benn Act says that without agreement, he has to apply for an extension.
And under the terms of this Letwin Amendment, if it passes, it would not the motion would not be in agreement to the deal. It would be withholding agreement until the legislation. So that means that the Benn Act stands and he has to extend. If you'll excuse me walking away from a reversing lorry.
That's all right. Okay. But thank you for that.
Fundamentally on the numbers, it means that we don't know that people who support the amended motion tomorrow actually support Boris Johnson's deal at all.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Matthew. Well, I don't know how you feel. Perhaps you're in the car or at home, and maybe you've just about had enough of parliamentary shenanigans. But it looks like we're going to have a couple more weeks of full-on parliamentary shenanigans, starting with that vote tomorrow. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's assume the vote is tomorrow. If it's not tomorrow, it's likely to be, very, very shortly next week that MPs do this. And it really is a question. Do you believe Boris when he tells you that it's a great new deal, Or do you believe me when I tell you that actually it's 95% the same as Mrs. May's abject surrender? It's better than what Mrs. May presented, but that it's not good enough because it's not really Brexit. That's really what I'm asking you. Sam is a new caller from Tower Hamlets. Good evening, Sam.
Hi, Nigel. First-time caller. I've always enjoyed watching and listening to you, even if, to be honest, I haven't always agreed.
Well, in a democracy, Sam, nor should you. Absolutely.
Exactly. Now, I would like my MP to vote against this deal tomorrow. I think in most ways it's actually worse than Theresa May's deal. We still don't have any freedom to strike our own free trade deals. We keep freedom of movement. There's obviously a high risk of it splitting up the union. Now, it does look like the Remain MPs in Parliament are going to use everything they can to prevent us getting a no-deal Brexit. So, all in all, I think Boris's deal, as with the May one, doesn't give us freedom, it keeps freedom of movement. Parts of us are still subject to the ECJ, and as other people have said, it's going to have negative economic benefits and drag out for years. No matter what happens, this is not solved by October 31st.
No, and of course, one of the arguments, business-wise, of course, Sam, is we need to end the uncertainty, and this, I think, will just prolong it for several more years.
Exactly. We'll have votes all the time on whether we extend the transition period or whether we leave or whether we have a deal and so on. So I have one quick question for you. This deal is not great for whether you remain or leave. Theresa May's deal was also pretty bad. So therefore, if you, Nigel, if you had to choose between this Boris Johnson deal and remaining in the EU, what would you choose today?
Well, I just don't accept that choice, Sam, because Sam, I would rather than accept a very substandard treaty that leaves us trapped, costs a fortune, and promises nothing other than years of haggling, which I don't see delivering the kind of trade deal we need. I would rather that we waited for a general election. I'd rather a short extension than accept this, Sam.
I agree. No deal Brexit is going to have more clarity. It will be worse in the short term, sure, but maybe better in the long term. Either Boris's deal or May's deal is just terrible for everyone.
Shocking.
Now, no deal has pretty much been taken off the table. So surely, therefore, whether you'll leave or remain, nobody likes this deal. It's horrible for everyone. So shouldn't we just remain and try and reform the EU? And I'm not a Remainer, by the way.
Well, very interesting. Guy Verhofstadt this morning. We can't trust the Americans. We need the European army now, and it needs to be active. There is no reform, Sam. They are moving full on to a centralised United States of Europe, fully militarised and everything else. There is no reform. I think we can argue that British governments over 40 years tried to reform it, and they failed every single time. I just take this view, Sam. I think that at a general election, there is a chance that we would get a parliament that reflected the Leave majority in this country.
But I agree with you. I think we should leave. I'm pro-leaving, but I do think the whole point about, we're going to have stuff forced on us, like an EU army, join the Euro, so on. That is, frankly, a lie. The UK has vetoes over certain things. I would rather
we don't have vetoes, Sam. We don't have vetoes, but we have opt-outs.
We have opt-outs and we have certain vetoes. We can vote against things. Look at what's going to happen if we get this deal. One EU country, Belgium, a regional parliament in Belgium could veto our deal. There is democracy in the EU. You have to say that. It may not be perfect, and it may be better to leave, but there is a form of... It's very hard to have
treaty change. Treaty change needs unanimity, and that includes all parliaments. Where the democratic problem comes is that new legislation or the repeal of legislation all comes from the Commission. Sam, would you? So are you telling me you'd rather stay than accept this new treaty?
I voted to leave. I've always been pro-leave, but given where we are today, given how much has changed, right now I would rather we stay than take this deal.
Okay.
And I definitely was never pro-no deal.
It's a very, very interesting point of view. Thank you. And I know several Leavers who feel like that. They're so appalled by this treaty that that's how they feel. Let's go to Wakefield and speak to George. George, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Good to speak to you again.
Good to speak to you. So, is it a great new deal?
No, it's absolutely terrible. And, the fact that Boris can say that it's great even now just tells me he doesn't really believe in Brexit. And I remember you saying recently that looking at the video of the morning the referendum result was announced, that Boris's face didn't exactly look like he was a happy bunny. So I looked at that footage and I have to agree there wasn't any joy there, either in winning the campaign or, as what that meant to win the campaign. So I just don't think we've got a PM who really believes in the process.
George, there are many that think it was a sort of career decision to go for Brexit, and maybe it was. He did, as Prime Minister, bring optimism and energy to the job, and that was a very, very good thing. But he has been making it clear for weeks that, his highest priority was to get rid of the backstop, and he's done that. So that's his achievement. But, George, the rest of it is horrible. What do you think's going to happen in the vote, George?
I think it might be close, but I still believe that it might edge in our favour, which would be for an extension. And I just hope that we get a general election sooner rather than later. And, I think when it comes, people need to remember it's not just leaving the EU that's the question now. It's the desperate need for major change in our own country.
Oh, and political reform, George. That is something that is a lot of people support now. George, thank you for your call. Edwina says, the sight of Brussels rejoicing made me reach for the bucket. Edwina, they were having a great night because they think this is going to get passed. And that means they've got us where they want us. They are in charge of all of the next stage of negotiations. Monsieur Barnier has set out his agenda already. He's written it into this quite new political declaration. And if we do conclude a trade deal on those terms, we will effectively become associate members of the European Union. We will not have a clean break, and that's where Boris is taking us, and I don't like it. I'm against it. This is a special edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:30 in time for the news with Lisa Aziz.
Ahead of a Crunch Commons vote on his revised Brexit deal tomorrow, Boris Johnson's called it a vast step forward that busts the UK out of the problematic backstop agreed to by Theresa May. The Prime Minister is urging MPs on all sides to support it in a rare Saturday sitting. A church warden has been jailed for at least 36 years for murdering a retired university lecturer after drugging and manipulating him. 28-year-old Benjamin Field inherited Peter Farquhar's home and savings before attempting to kill a neighbour in the same Buckinghamshire village of Maids Morton. The clothing retailer Bon Marché has gone into administration, putting more than 2,800 jobs at risk.
We will get back control of our laws, our money and our borders, not realising none of it's actually true unless we're able at the next stage to negotiate some sort of miracle. And that's why right now people say to me, a lot of them, well, Nigel, come on, get with it. It's the pragmatic thing to do. It's now or never. And that's why the Letwin Amendment potentially is a nightmare for the Prime Minister. Because if this process of final approval gets kicked down for another couple of weeks, do you know what's going to happen in those 2 weeks? People will find out what is actually in these documents. And the more they find out, the less they are going to like them. That is my prediction. Anthony on YouTube says, Nigel, if you were the PM, how would you have negotiated a deal bearing in mind the Benn Act? Anthony, it's not a deal, it's a treaty. I would have had nothing to do with it whatsoever. If I was Boris Johnson, I would have played for time and waited for a general election. I actually think, Anthony, that you could build, for a general election, a Leave alliance of people, and some would come in from the Brexit Party, the Conservatives, some might come from Labour, and if a Leave alliance was built with a very, very clear free trade agreement, genuine free trade agreement, is the only option acceptable. But clean break Brexit is now where the country is. And on a clean break Brexit, it would win a majority. Andrew says, Nigel was right about Boris. Leave now on WTO. Well, I have over the last few weeks been, I suppose, increasingly critical of the Prime Minister. There are many things about him I like, but I'm afraid this is exactly what I feared he'd do. Sign up to something that is truly awful, better than Mrs May, so it's now only the second worst deal in history, and then try and bounce us all into it. And I have to say, I don't like it. I'm disgusted, says Alan in Romford. I could spit razors. Sam is a new caller from Wiltshire. Sam, good evening.
Oh, hello, Nigel. First-time caller.
Well done.
I saw you a long time ago in Gloucester, actually, at a Goes campaign.
Okay, well, I don't remember exactly, but Sam, it's lovely to have you on. And
oh, no, I never met you. I walked past because I couldn't be asked to queue.
Okay, well, fair enough. Fair. Well, if you just walk on by. Well, you can now tell the nation on LBC, do you think it's a great new deal, or is it rubbish?
It's rubbish.
Is it?
It's obviously rubbish. I think it's going to stick us in something that we all voted to not do. It means that we're never going to be able to compete and become the best we can be. I don't know. I'm looking at this in layman's terms, and from what I can see, it means we can't ever trade better than the EU because their rules are going to stop us being able to compete with them.
Sam,
in or out.
You've just used the word. You've used it twice in this conversation, a word that nobody ever uses now in political debate in Britain, compete. Angela Merkel, at the start of this week, said, with the UK leaving the European Union, we face a potential competitor, one that could rival America or China. Their biggest fear, Sam, is we break free and become a competitor. And what Boris Johnson is signing us up to is a potential new free trade agreement that stops us from becoming competitive. And that's how bad this is.
Yeah.
That's how bad this is.
We can never make ourselves more competitive with them.
Yep.
Because it's there in the treaty that we cannot do that. And then that's aside from the fact that they still want to fish our waters. And we've still got to be under the ECJ rules. So I think it's a rubbish deal.
Sam,
and it's not what we voted for.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, but thank you so much for using that word compete. It really is important and nobody else is talking about it. Thank you, Sam. Absolutely terrific. Christine says she can't believe we've been stitched up by people who we put our faith and trust in. Cecil says Brexiteers in Northern Ireland don't need the fine detail of this treaty to know we've been sold out by a British PM. He's aligning with Dublin politics. We need a short extension to stop Boris. Cecil, I think the Northern Irish thing, some would argue that potentially being part of both jurisdictions could be good because more manufacturers might move in. But the truth of it is, Cecil, the ECJ in any dispute will decide all of those things. And the fact that Boris himself said no British Prime Minister could ever put a border in between different parts of the United Kingdom is exactly what he's done with his great new deal, which I've got very little faith in. Terry is a new caller from Basildon. Good evening, Terry.
Yeah, hiya.
So,
I think I'd like my MP to vote for the Oliver Letwin amendment,
yes,
along with the deal, because obviously it's better than the kamikaze clean break Brexit, and it's not as good as the current deal we currently enjoy.
Why was our current? But we voted against our current deal, Terry.
Well, the referendum did, but obviously the information that the people got wasn't exactly correct, was it?
No, they weren't told about the European army. They weren't told about the United States of Europe. We should have said, I think the Leave side should have said more, shouldn't it, really?
Well, it should have informed everybody about the real cost of the WTO tariffs that will be applied to every goods that will come into the country, adding up to about 18 billion a year at the moment, which every person who buys goods will have to pay for.
But Terry, we have WTO tariffs on Australian wine, on children's shoes, on all sorts of clothes. I mean, we pay lots of tariffs at the moment.
Yeah, we're going to be paying a lot more with the EU stuff, won't we?
And they'll be paying a lot more from ours until we can come to a sensible deal.
To them, but we'll be paying 18 billion on the goods that come in because we are mainly an importing nation. So therefore, all the goods that come in will be having tariffs applied to them.
Well, we do trade at a surplus with the rest of the world. But Terry, that's by the by. That's by the by.
Well, it's not really. Everybody's got to realise that the cost of have an 18 billion pound tax rise, won't we? So Terry, the difference is at the moment.
So why are the Germans?
The more you buy,
Terry, why are the Germans so scared?
The more you pay in tariffs.
Why are the Germans
go up?
Why are the Germans so scared? Why are they so scared of us breaking free?
Well, I don't think they are.
Mrs. Merkel's terrified.
Well, no, she's not. She don't look terrified to me.
I repeat what I said a few minutes ago. With the UK leaving, we face the prospect of a competitor who could rival America or China. I mean, Verhofstadt rants. We must not allow the UK. We can't allow them to become a Singapore.
You obviously smoke a lot. I'm not sure what you've been smoking, but I think you're in cloud cuckoo land.
Well, I quoted you, Merkel. I quoted you, Verhofstadt. I'm telling you, after 20 years there, they're terrified of us leaving on a clean break Brexit.
Well, a manufacturing country like Germany, it's predominantly their manufacturing. We're 20%. They're most of theirs is manufacturing. Economy. We're not. So what are we going to compete with them?
I think our tariffs, Terry,
how are we going to compete with them when we're only 20%, or even less than that, as manufacturing base? When there's predominantly manufacturing and exporting nation, we're not.
Terry, you seem to be
be
obsessed with Europe. It's a tiddly part of the world now, isn't it? Declining with every year that goes by.
Look on the planet.
What is it? 15% of global GDP now, Europe?
Well, it's 45% of our economy.
Well, 38. No, it's not. It is not, Terry. It's about 11.5% of our economy.
Okay.
No, it is. And this is the great misnomer, Terry.
So where...
This is the great misnomer. It's all presented.
What organisation published those figures that you quote?
88 over... Okay. Terry, over 88% of the British economy... Over 88%. You're quoting figures at me. You're going to get one back. That's all. Over 88% of the UK economy does not export goods to Europe. All right?
Okay. It operates within the EU trading agreements around the world. That's how we operate at the moment.
Well, they've been very bad at doing them.
88% of our trade, if you say that, is within the EU trading agreements around the world.
Oh, Terry, look. Terry, look.
So what we're signed up to at the moment, okay, is we're within the EU trading agreements. And you're saying to everybody, it's great to come out of all that. Well,
absolutely. Because I can see countries like Switzerland have far more trade deals than we do.
But you'll have to tell everybody the cost of that.
We could save a fortune. I tell you what, Aussie wine's going to be dead cheap once we leave the European Union and back in control of our own tariffs. And I'm looking forward to it. It's 6:45. Time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz.
Ahead of a crunch Commons vote on his revised Brexit deal tomorrow, Boris Johnson's called his agreement a vast step forward that busts the UK out of the problematic backstop and which MPs should now support. The high street retailer Bon Marché has collapsed into administration, putting almost 2,900 jobs at risk across the country. A man who drugged and killed a university lecturer to inherit his Buckinghamshire home and money has been jailed for at least 36 years. LBC weather, showers dying out for many, but some rain continuing over parts of North Wales, Northern England and Scotland overnight, a low of 6 degrees.
LBC Travel, I'm Dave Goff.
Assuming this vote goes ahead tomorrow, the keys to it will be: what do the ERG do, particularly with 28 who voted 3 times against Mrs May's version of the treaty? And also, what do some of those Labour MPs do, representing very strong Leave areas? Lisa says to me, I'm glad to see Steve Baker, Bill Cash and Mark Francois are going through it thoroughly before commenting. I would trust these 3 more than I would anyone who voted for May's treaty. Lisa, we'll see. At Maastricht, quarter of a century ago, very similar people to this said they'd vote against it and then in the end voted for it, because what they did is they put party before country. And we'll see what those 3 individuals do tomorrow. We'll see whether they stick to their principles, or we'll see whether the pressure being put upon them and the promises being made by Michael Gove and Boris Johnson change their view. Certainly, it'll affect my view of what I think about them. It really, really will. Peter says, sign up to Boris's treaty and we will be poorer. So there's a negative there. What does Kelvin, a new caller from Guildford, make of it all? Hi, Kelvin.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So, is this the answer to our prayers?
Not at all. No, I think this is a terrible idea. It should not go through tomorrow.
Interesting. I mean, Kelvin, the newspapers today were wall to wall. Hooray! Public rally to Johnson's great victory. Jacob writing him a newspaper saying how wonderful the whole thing was. Like VE Day, I thought. I mean, and yet I'm getting a lot of callers like you who are more sceptical. What is the reason that you are so sceptical?
Well, I've always thought that any deal the EU agrees to is going to be a bad one for us.
Do you know what? When I saw Juncker smiling yesterday, I thought, cripes, we must be in trouble here. So what would you like to see happen, Kelvin?
I would like to see it voted down, and I'm hoping that Boris is playing a very clever game, and perhaps he knows that this deal is not going to go through, and he's just done it so that he can say, I've got a deal, you're now shooting it down in Parliament, and perhaps he's got a legal loophole from that to not have to go and ask for an extension.
Kelvin, I don't believe that for one moment. I really don't. But what I do think is he knows that if it does get voted down, he can go to the country when the general election happens and say, at every twist and turn, the political class in Westminster have frustrated me, and that may be part of his thinking. Kelvin, thank you. Off to Heather, a new caller from Dorchester. Good evening, Heather.
Oh, hello, Nigel. Can you hear me okay?
I certainly can. So, is this a great new deal?
No.
Oh, really?
I've tried to teach myself and learn more about the politics over the last 3 years, so I don't know everything. I can't quote facts and figures, but I've listened to what you've been saying and see the importance of us being independent and,
yes,
like one of your other callers said, competitive with each other, and we should be able to do that. We're grown-ups. we can leave home, go make our own deals with other companies, and just enjoy dealing with other people in the world.
So you support, I mean, from the sounds of it, Heather, you support the clean break Brexit, do you?
Definitely.
And what if there were some short-term economic consequences of a clean break Brexit, as some warn?
But then I think you have to. There are going to be things that are not going to be pleasant at first. You know, I accept that, and I think as long as the politicians and those that are dealing with this are honest with people, I think a lot of people will agree with this.
Heather, what
because
a concept!
It's like when you first move out of home,
yeah,
things are tricky at first, and you've got to set up your bills and all these sorts of things. I know it's not a very good analogy.
No, actually it's perfect. All big changes in life lead to some short-term disruption. Of course they do. But you think, I mean, you've got the confidence. You believe that we can do this and stand on our own in the world.
Of course, we've got enough smart people in our country, and a lot of people with common sense. They don't always come together. But
well, Heather, I wish there were more bright people with common sense in Parliament, is all I can say. Thank you for your call. Going to Manchester to speak to Lee, another new caller. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, come on, tell me. Someone's got to tell me that it's a great new deal, because I'm struggling to find supporters of this at the moment.
I would love to, Nigel.
Yep.
But I'd go to war before I signed that deal.
Really?
Yes, it is that bad.
What in particular makes you so angry about it?
It's undemocratic. It's everything that's going in Westminster right now. I mean, Northern Ireland, staying in the customs union, single market. Scotland are immediately going to ask that same thing.
Well, in theory, they're leaving the customs union. But listen, Lee, I agree with you. One of the unintended consequences, if this was to pass, is that in the next phase of this, as we head up apparently towards a new trade agreement, Scotland will ask for exactly the same. Why is nobody else saying this today on our national media?
I honestly don't know, because it's a disgrace. If you think about it, if he gives that to Scotland and Ireland, you are then telling 1.5 million British voters, your vote doesn't count. The English vote's more important than your vote. They can have it. They can leave. You can't.
So Northern Ireland's been given a very bad deal, yeah?
Yeah, they have. But I think it'll lead to the Leave voters in Scotland getting a bad deal as well. I mean, no one's even mentioned they're giving away our assets to the EIB and all our future, profits. But we're remaining contingent for liabilities up to 500 billion.
Lee, we have left on the table £7 billion of our money that Philip Hammond left on the table at the EIB. We didn't claim it. And you're quite right. With Boris's new treaty, we have contingent liabilities. Well, your figure's higher than mine, but certainly over 30 billion if the Eurozone went down the tubes. Lee, can I love you and leave you? One last quick caller. John in Wolverhampton. Come on, John. Someone tell me that Boris is going to give us a great new deal.
Boris has just given us the great new deal, and bear this in mind, it's called PTSD. The polished turd stitch-up deal.
Right, John.
That is what we're getting, and you can either vote for it, chaps, or it's limbo and the end of the Tory party, Nigel. So we don't want that.
So is it all about the Tory party, John? Is it about Brexit or the Tory party?
It's all about the establishment with a small e. That's why Juncker was so happy, because they're all happy to go along with the global governance, aren't they? So they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to rock the boat too much, because this damn populism thing's getting rather out of hand, chaps. So we've got to put it back in his box. And that Nigel guy, dear oh dear, he's been a thorn in the side of everybody for so long. It's time we need to shut him up, because you know what? He'll have the keys to number 10 before you know it. Who they'll bloody well put them. So let's pretend. So let's get Priti Patel to have all these faux interviews where they sound like they're really under the cosh, but they're not really, because we're all little damn good chaps from Eton behind the scenes, aren't we, chaps? Yes, we are, chaps. That's what it's all about.
John,
so don't be fooled, people.
Right.
Do not be fooled.
John,
it's all smoke and mirrors.
Very entertaining, thank you. And not scientific, but we've had an absolutely full switchboard here tonight and bombarded by messages, and very few of you think this is a great new deal. We'll see what happens tomorrow. We'll see whether the Letwin Amendment messes things up. I will be back with you at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. At 10 tonight, it's Nick Abbott. But up now, it's Andrew Pearce.
Thank you, Nigel. And coming up, Boris Johnson has given a series of interviews urging MPs to, quote, come together to back the Brexit deal he says he's secured with the EU. He says there is no better outcome. He says he wants the country to move on from Brexit, which he says is divisive, and he's hopeful the deal will pass the Commons tomorrow. The first time the Commons has sat for 37 years. The last time we were at war. We were about to go to war with Argentina, who'd invaded the Falklands. Well, I want to know, do you want to go to war with Boris Johnson over this deal? Do you want your MP to support it, or is it a great sellout? I'm Andrew Pearce, this is LBC, and that's all next.